Hello, everybody. we are at our final group presentation, and now we're going to talk about implementing federated identity management for Earth science data access. And the person who is moderating this talk is Josh Drake. As you remember, Josh is a security services manager at OmniSoc.
Thanks, Jeanette. Well, we made it almost. Right? Everyone's full of cheese, so try to be interesting and keep you awake, not in a cheese coma. I'm very excited to introduce this panel and have a conversation and a presentation from these folks. We're going to do this in two parts. We're going to talk about Doug and Rob's experience implementing and designing an identity management system for a merged organization. They're from the SAGE and Gage facilities who are merging into EarthScope at the beginning of next year. And so we have worked with them for 2-ish years now, 2.5, almost 3 years, on these projects as part of the identity management working group that was formerly jointly operated by Trusted CI and CI Compass, and now led by Erik at CI Compass. And so we're going to invite Doug and Rob up to talk about their experiences designing and implementing federated identity management at their facilities and into the future of their merged facilities. And then after that, we're going to have a presentation from Erik on the Federated Identity Management Cookbook, which is the output of our couple of years working together on identity management problems facing researchers. So Erik and I have recently co-authored that book, and it was published earlier this year. With that, I will turn things over to Doug.
So I am from that great state of eat cheese and die, born and raised there, as I say. So, where's the clicker? Oh, there it is. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about identity management at UNAVCO. First of all, I'll just tell you what we do. We gather GPS measurements. So if you ever see these in the field, because you may run across them if you're on a mountaintop or whatever, but that little weird thing there is the antenna, and that's really the point that gets measured right below it. And then over in a box there, you'll see excuse me, you won't see the receiver, but that's where the receiver sits, and that's the thing that calculates the GPS measurements. And those two are usually connected by a cable. But anyways, we collect data, we archive it, we distribute it real time. There's a protocol called NTRIP, which some of you may or may not know. It's very similar to, or it's built on top of HTTP, very simple protocol. We do web services, we do HTTP for data services. We also support PIs in the field. So people come to us and say, hey, we want some instruments to do some type of what we call a campaign. And we give them instruments, they go out and do studies, and then we'll collect their data and archive it and store it for them. We also support, well, there's permanent instruments in the field, and many of these are permanent that you'll see. We also do education's a big part, educating future researchers and all the new technology that comes out and how people can use that. And we also do some other data collection. We do what's called borehole instruments, where they, drill a hole in the ground, and in there they put what we call tilt meter, measuring how things tilt on the Earth, or accelerometers, how fast things are moving up and down, or pore pressures or strain meters that we have as well. But the majority of our work is in the GPS arena. For my talk, I was going to talk a little bit about history. So I came to UNAVCO in 2014. One of the first things I noticed was, God, we got a lot of different systems to log into, and I got all these passwords. I must probably confess, I was thinking about this morning, I bet I wrote some of those down and put them on sticky somewhere. And I was like, oh, this is a real good opportunity. So one of the things I immediately was, we got to get rid of all these password systems because people are like, what's my password? Reset my password. And we're even a small organization, and a lot of people were having problems with this, so we were spending a lot of time on that. So, and there was no centralized administration. I could go to a server and bango, there were people on there that left 10 years ago. And it's like, wow. Anyways, so I thought about it for a while, and then I ended up choosing Active Directory only because we had a Windows environment, we had a Linux environment. Probably the easiest solution to implement was to go to Active Directory and use LDAP to get for credentials. So I went ahead, because we had to support the Active Directory from a business standpoint. So went ahead with that. About that time, Okta approached me as well and said, you know, maybe you should consider us. And they were trying to get us, and I was like, well, how am I going to support all these CentOS systems I have with Okta? And that was a real problem. So I thought about it a little bit, but kind of ignored it. And then here comes the cloud. We're moving to the cloud. A lot of our, or actually all of our operations are going to be moving to the cloud. And this kind of was, as they call it, a technology, what do they call it? I can't think of it, disruption or whatever. And so this way I thought about was not going to work because things in the cloud are a little bit different. So, okay, we got to evolve. And we also started moving. We had a mail server when I came. This worked for the mail server. We moved to Gmail, of course. Nope, that didn't work. So it's time to evolve. So the next thing that happened was we had a review from NSF in 2019. And they asked the question, who's using your data? And we said, well, we got all these IPs. And if any of you know, one of our biggest IPs was Comcast.net. Well, that's one IP for how many users and where they're coming from. So that's, you know, it's like, well, we can't really answer that question, but we can tell you how many IPs. So they weren't happy with that. So in 2020, the summer, actually, I think it started with Vaughn. I asked him about identity management and I had this need to get to a common one. And that evolved, and eventually we got into an engagement with Trusted CI and started looking at identity management, a development of a centralized system. We decided to use CI Logon for the engagement. One of the things we needed to do was support people in Europe as well, because we have a lot of European researchers that access our data, and they need to. So that was a big thing. We didn't want researchers, or we didn't want to put the burden on researchers to have yet another login ID, just like the thing I talked about at the beginning. I didn't want to have all those login IDs, and I'm sure they didn't want. So we implemented with Apache an authentication authorization system as part of that engagement. So talk a little bit about our development path and some of what our requirements are. I talked about why we needed a federated. We had all these users throughout the world that we had to support. We wanted the capability to have some social logins. We wanted also the ability for users to create their own. One of the things we said, oh, we can do Google. Well, and we have commercial users as well. We could use Google as a source for an IDP, but there's a lot of people out there that don't like Google, unfortunately. Well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but there are people out there that don't like Google. And we didn't want to discourage them. So we said, okay, if that's the case, we'll allow people to create their own user ID if they want to. So we did that. We came up with, we wanted a custom login screen. We wanted the ability to support a browser, which you know, like if you're going to things these days, a lot of things are supported in browsers, so you definitely need that. But you also need command line support, because a lot of our users are still using the command line. And the final thing is kind of another thing. As we develop things and have built things, we also figured out people are moving, of course, to containers. And the environment we had developed for, I'll show you in a bit, didn't really support containers well. So we had to think of a way where people could come and develop a container. And as I say it, or my organization says, or people in the organization that work for me say, we need a way that they don't have to prime the pump. In other words, they don't have to log in and get a key or some secret. They have a way in an environment where there's containers, they can build what's called basically a set of secrets to use as credentials to get the data, and we can then identify them. So we started with CI logon, as I said earlier, and did some development. We ran into some issues. It was a bit difficult for people to understand at first, the technology. And we had a lot of questions. And we just didn't get, things weren't moving as quickly as we wanted them to. So we went, and at the same time, I got approached by Auth0. I also found out from an organization called Neon, who's in Boulder as well. They had used Auth0 in their development. It actually was a little bit lower barrier to get going and things like that. And it was something that there was a lot of good documentation. They spent a lot of money on it, but it was well documented. And they had a lot of examples on how to do things and stuff like that. And the people doing the development were able to pick it up a little bit easier than they did with CI logon. As I said, Neon was using the product. We were able to talk with them, discuss it, talk about their experience with it. We could also see on their website how they were using it in some of the things we had to support, and that was really helpful to have a real-world example. Talk a little bit about the merger. We also had the merger coming up with, and Rob will talk in a minute about his organization, but we were coming together. Unfortunately, the deadline we were given by NSF was right before the merger to get this done. And at first we kind of struggled, how are we going to do this? But then we decided to do it together, so we had a joint development together across the two organizations. And we wanted to do this so our users didn't have a disruption with the merger, because we didn't want Rob's organization or my organization of users to say, oh, well, we merged, you got to create a new password, that kind of thing. So we developed it so that when the two organizations come together, they can use the same thing. And they've been told that, and you'll see in a bit why they should understand, but you never know. So here's our login page. Our login page, basically very simple. You log in password, and then if you don't, there's a sign up link there, or you can sign in with Google, or you can sign on with CI logon. Then after you log in, you have to go through a short enrollment. We just ask you a very few set of questions, like your name, first name, institute, can't remember everything that's there. And I think the one thing is your area of work, which is selection, like if you're in education and commercial user, because we do have a lot of commercial users. Surveyors actually use our service to do surveys, to get accurate surveys. So anyways, that's the sign up. And we initially out of the gate, we did our web access, which is basically an HTTP data server. So that was our first thing where we kind of got our feet wet. And the next thing we've tackled and released, we've put out a command line interface. The thing I talked about, which we haven't done yet, is containers. We're on the working on that. We haven't done that. And we are basically using different login flows that the vendor provided for us in their development. So the command line is just Python 3.8. It's built on top of, I don't know if any of you have used Typer in Python. If you go to AWS and use their command line, use Google's command line, it's pretty much the same type of thing, where you type in, you know, like I think it's gcloud and then a command and those kinds of things. But we built it on top of that. It allows users to log in, but they have to have internet access. So you put in a command and you say you want to log in, like on a command line, and then it says, oh, go to your browser and go to this link. And that actually was a little bit confusing because some people did this on machines and they're like, well, I don't have a browser on this machine. But the way it works is basically you can put the link in any machine and put the browser because there's a callback that comes through and completes it. But that was confusing to people because they were like, well, I don't have a browser. How do I do this? And so if any of you ever implement that, that's one thing to be cognitive of. And here's a couple links to the SDK or the CLI if you're interested. And I talked a little bit about containers. The one thing we are implementing with this is called machine-to-machine login flow. Because of the vendor and because of the sort of load that it puts on their system, they limit the number you can have per month. So that is one thing we have to implement is how do we limit our users from, you know, basically sitting there constantly asking for tokens and saying, give me a new token. So that's one thing we have to do with this implementation is we have to figure out a scheme for limiting the number that they ask for. And we're trying to keep that as stateless as possible. And it does have expiration and refresh just like everything else. So, and just getting back to single authentication systems, we're looking to use it internally as well. As we move to the cloud, we're looking to use it internally. So from where I started, got a disruption, but maybe eventually I'll get back to the point I want to get to is where I got a single login. And I just want to thank everybody that's been very helpful on this journey. And I forgot a few people, I'm sure, but I forgot Vaughn because he's the first person I contacted about this. He got me in touch with EWA, and then the people with Trusted CI, CI Logon, we had an identity management working group that we've worked through and helped us learn this, Neon for all their support, and I guess the last is NSF for kicking us in the butt and getting us going on this journey. So, thank you. What's that? Oh yeah, and CI Compass as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. That was a great intro. And The slides that I have are going to just kind of like jump right into the Iris side of things because really the story that you see from Doug is basically the story that Iris went through as well. We had the same motivation, the same driver, the same goals. And so we, a couple of years ago, ended up forming a design and development team. So let me figure out how to advance this thing. It's the big green one. The biggest button there. All right. So just to kind of dovetail off of what Doug was talking about, we formed up a team because we knew that in addition to having an administrative merger, becoming one organization, we're going to have a single architecture ultimately. And so we wanted to work together on building a single identity management system that would solve both of our needs and represent the new data system that was going to come out of this merger. And the real difficulty is that we still have running on-prem systems, and we're going to continue to do so for some time because we're not going to just make this grand leap and take all of our community with us over to the cloud. We've got to prove out the cloud while the old system is still there. And so what that means is that in the process of moving to a new form of identity management and authentication and authorization system, you still have to have tethers to the old system, and perhaps ways that you have established that by. So Iris is actually had a login on this website for at least a decade, and it's provided a lot of facilities to users that enable them to have mailing list subscriptions, giving them permissions to access certain special pages, and some other persistent elements that kind of help the user experience. One of the necessary aspects of having some kind of credential also stems from the need to only permit user access to certain restricted data sets. And we've had restricted data sets. These are experiments that have a moratorium of approximately 2 years, maybe 3 years, where the principal investigator has exclusive rights to that data set, and it does not get shared openly until the moratorium expires. So we have, over the past 25 years, had a number of different forms of authentication system for this. And as it happens, the authentication system didn't ever dovetail with the website login. So we were faced with having two different systems that we wanted to accommodate. And as Doug said, we wanted to start to consolidate markets. We wanted to make it easier for users to be able to have a single login of their own choice, to come in and be able to use any of the facilities that requires their identity and not have to continue to log in or have different accounts. So the real task for us was to take the things that we developed together and tie this as a redirect back to Iris. So what you picture the flow being is the Iris community is still coming onto our website. They get reflected over to this new login window, and then they get reflected back to their point of origin, which was Iris. And so we've managed to work out this summer those tie-ins, and we called it the Lucid Project. It actually is an acronym. But this was our way of tying the original accounts that we have on our site to this new system, which is not only centralized between Iris and UNAVCO, but contains a little of additional demographic information that will help us in the future to enhance our reporting to the NSF and other stakeholders. So what you see on this screen is basically just a real quick 3-panel example of what the steps are for a user to log in and ultimately be at their account at Iris. So the critical thing, of course, with Iris, as with UNAVCO, is data access. That's what we're all about. That's our reason for being. For the past decade or more, we've had web services as our primary means of data access. We've gone away from having quite so much batch access that happens in the background through some like submitted request, something coming through email or whatnot. And we went through this adventure of going through Corba for a while. If some of you remember Corba, we had some tools that permitted access that way. And ultimately, we ended up realizing that something that was more RESTful was actually much easier for users to approach. They could use just about any ad hoc tool they wanted to. And we ended up developing a suite of services. There's actually more than 30 different services that Iris provides that perform various functions. And some of them actually can work in a cooperative way on a client application, or even within the service architecture at Iris itself. So this first example that I'm showing is our data access endpoint, which is arrayed in a way that has now become an international standard. So not only do you see this type of web service here at Iris, but you actually see this at 20 or so different data repositories in the US and around the world. And so now we've become this federation of web services. But its mode of access has always been anonymous. And so the anonymous access is through this query endpoint, which you see here. And then you put a set of parameters afterwards. So you can't say that this is truly REST because it's not entirely path-based. You end up getting to where you have query parameters that is more relational in nature. So the whole thing of going from mostly anonymous access to where we actually want to track authenticated users means we need to have authenticated access. Fortunately, as a part of this internationally recognized standard of web services, because of those restricted data sets I was talking about earlier, we also had a specification for an endpoint for authorized access. Requires a username and a password, and that service provider would then consult its internal log of users, permitted users, for a given data set, and either approve or disapprove of the access. And so this endpoint requires digest authentication. As I said, this was a decade ago. We were doing good just to get to something that was not basic authentication, something a little more secure. And it works pretty well. And so the question is now, you go from something that's this Auth0 system that really almost presupposes, well, it in fact is OpenID Connect enabled, but then to have this translate into something that works with a system that was not designed with OIDC in mind, or OAuth 2 for that matter. So this was the bridge that we had to try to cross in the interest of keeping a continuity of service at Iris. So our goal is to extend all of our data access to bring it into our requiring authorization, or authentication, sorry. So just a quick review. You probably are all familiar with digest authentication, but basically you send the client credentials in an encrypted form back to the server. And so there's a hash involved that gets tied in, and there's a one-time key. So it's pretty secure, but you always, every time you access, you don't actually have the notion of a session. You actually have to authenticate for each and every connection. So it's a little bit process redundant. So what we have with the new system that ties in with this login is once you're reflected back and you're logged into the website, you can go to your account and look at your profile and retrieve a key. And as you can see in this example, and yes, this is faked, so it's not, I didn't actually show my credentials, just so you know. But when you get this key, you can set the expiration time. And we're being very liberal with it right now. And we decided to follow the lead of some of our international colleagues that have a similar system to allow the user to say, what are you comfortable with allowing as far as how long your key is available before you have to come back and refresh, which you can do through this interface. This also facilitates ease of access generating a netrc file, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So let's just get into the nitty-gritty. As Doug was saying, we have a lot of users that run their own tools. They're automated, they're high speed, and in some cases, fully unattended. And so we want to permit access to these systems not relying on a web browser, but instead something that you can run a script and your authentication becomes part of the flow. So just an example here is running something in Python using a very popular Python library for seismology called obfspi. And so they have the facilities in there for plugging in a username. And the password, again, is not something that you created, you know, something that you remember, like, you know, my phone number plus my address or something. This is something that we generate and give you that lasts for a limited amount of time. And so this is just an example of a programmatic way of going and fetching waveforms and identifying yourself and basically authenticating your access. We have another utility that is written in Perl, and it has what is a command line entry for authentication. And of course, a lot of you would probably be arguing, well, this is not very secure. And you would be right. This is less than ideal. It's easy to use, and only someone else that can see that existing system would be able to see the process running with those credentials showing up. But it's still a bit of a security concern. So what we want to do is use a more hidden file, something that's generally locked to that given user's account. So instead of having something where we're using curl and putting the credentials on the command line like you see at the top, we instead create a netrc entry in this .netrc file that only exists in my account, and then you would refer to it from curl. And so then your credentials are not in the clear when that call is made. What's nice with Python is it has this very commonly used library for HTTP access. So instead of that earlier example with obfspi where I had my credentials actually plugged into the code, or you'd be pulling it from some file or whatever, we would use the standard .netrc approach, having that hidden file. And this library readily pulls in netrc authentication. It has the capability of searching in various places for that file. So it's very simple to do. And this is an example of a post call to our web service with authentication. So we've got the command line thing at least started in a good way, but there are a lot of special cases that are going to come up that are going to complicate our rollout of this system. So we're not going to get this developed and then just shut the door and say, okay, everybody, now you have to authenticate, because we realize we have to address the needs of users with special cases such as an unattended display. You want to be able to fire this thing up, run your startup routine, have things come up and you can walk away, and it could run for 180 days and not ever have to be attended to by somebody at the museum. That would start making people mad. A tsunami warning center, they actually get data from us all the time on a regular basis. They get some feeds from us. Those are automated systems that you don't want to stop. You don't want somebody to have to worry about checking a screen all the time just to see that they can continue to get access. So at the outset, if we do end up managing to get most data access over to authentication, we're going to want to offer some sort of anonymous access for cases where authentication simply cannot happen. So this is more directed at things like the casual app that might be on a phone that's just accessing some plots. Not a really significant draw of data, but something that we would still want to offer that facility without troubling a user who is just interested in looking at a plot on their phone with having to log in to us. For something more like a museum display or tsunami warning center, we we want to allow the operator admin to create perhaps a non-personal account for that application. As long as there's some verifiable email address that would allow us to do some confirmation of there's an operator that has basically created this, this account and you know, pulled up these credentials, someone that we can contact. So yeah, that's kind of what we're looking at right now is being able to make that simple. Large group usage is also an important case for us. There are workshops and classes that happen in the name of seismology and geophysics all the time. So you picture 30 people all clicking the download button at the same time. Did you want or need to require all of those students or attendees to have to log into a system that they may just use for the purpose of this course? Do they have any discomfort in identifying themselves with this server, and will that affect their ability to get a grade in their course? We don't want that problem. And especially when you talk about minors, K through 12, and all anymore, electronics are in the hands of students even at a younger age. We definitely do not want to walk into that realm of requiring any identification. So what we would want to have in that scenario is have an instructor create a login account that can be shared amongst all the devices that are involved. And if they can identify that this course of this particular school or whatnot, that will help us in terms of our tracking. Again, these are the sorts of situations where we wouldn't get into the realm of the danger of somebody getting a credential, because in these situations, we wouldn't allow access to restricted data sets or anything that's under a high degree of restriction, because you, at that point, don't have an identifiable person who's responsible or explicitly given permission. So we may have a group activity registry that facilitates this particular kind of access. And I'm almost done. The final one is legacy code. Yes, there's a lot of stuff that's 30, 40, 50 years old. People still run. Never heard of authentication. They have a system that maybe used to just, you know, you'd load files off a tape onto disk and then run your processing there. And we managed to figure out some way of attaching a module that let them get to HTTP, but that was about it. So what we want to do for things that you probably couldn't even extend the code to be able to have the capability of authentication, or again, apps on a smartphone. You know, you want the general public to feel like they can at least look at wiggles on a screen and not have to become part of the iris, you know, realm. So we want to figure out some alternatives. And this is something we're still kind of puzzling over. But again, casual applications will still be able to use anonymous access. So if it's not a high download rate, we'll have a rate-limited gateway for that. If we can find a way to reliably register an application that presents a unique signature, such as a user agent, we might be able to permit anyone with that app and just categorize that access in that manner. And finally, what would be kind of a real magic thing for us is, and be a convenience for all concerned, is if we could develop a forward proxy, something that somebody could run on their client that would actually take care of the authentication on their behalf and remain stateful for the purposes of access. But the particulars of that we're still trying to work out, and I am doing some searching online to see whether somebody has already come up with such a process. So those are the kinds of situations we're looking at as we try to make our way into the future of having a good identity management system. So thank you for your time, and I guess not questions yet.
Yeah, we'll hold questions until Eric's done, and then we'll take questions for everyone all at once. So next up is Eric Scott from Rincy, and Eric leads the Identity Management Working Group at CI Compass. And Eric has been involved with me in the engagement process for Gage and also the cloud project at Iris.
Exactly. With CI Compass, we have a role in consulting, advising major facilities, and it's good to see a lot of people that actually I've only seen on Zoom calls. So it's very good, very good. I hope Alton Brown has a sense of humor. So one of our products that we've produced through CI Compass. We produced some very specific reports for some of your sites, some background information. And one of the things that we have produced is an identity management cookbook. And we've got a few other cookbook-like documents that are coming out fairly soon. So with CI Compass, probably about half of you, it looks like, are at major facilities, and you've heard of us, you've worked with us. So we're, again, NSF-funded center to provide consulting advice. And one of the questions that has come up, one of the big topics that comes up in almost every engagement that we've done is identity management. Identity management is the first visible point of contact that a lot of users have with security. Okay, so a lot of it's hidden from them, thank goodness, but at that point they start to realize, okay, so this is where security implications begin. That's your chance to start to set the tone for how your system, how your facility works. We've gotten to work with a lot of the facilities, and one thing that is a constant across them, it's a cliche to say that change is a constant, but this, you know, we've seen new facilities, we've seen a merger that's been a lot of fun. Sometimes, unfortunately, we saw a facility have a major change in direction. A lot of opportunities to go in and think about how we do identity management. Like I said, it's so good to see y'all. So you must realize by now, even if you're outside the facility looking in, it's not a place where staff necessarily are going to be able to specialize a whole lot. Staff's frequently a little thin on the ground. When they have a topic come up, they need to be able to get up to speed pretty quickly. So inside Compass, we had a identity management working group, a monthly meeting and questions and answers about tasks of how do I tell who a user is? How am I certain that user is that person? How do I not tie up an entire FTE trying to do that? One of the requests was, okay, we need a guide we can sit down and look at, and we also need something that we can show our users. The Ron Swanson help desk, it's a great joke, but you can't really get away with it. And by users, that includes your software developers. Okay, so developers will come in and they'll say, well, I've had a table of usernames and passwords for 19 years. Why are you making me use PAM and LDAP and all this? And it's, well, okay, new world, we got to do a little bit better now. Identity management's like a lot of things. It's one of those cases where the easy part's easy and the hard part is almost impossible. Keeping track of your own staff is not that necessarily hard. You've been doing it, so obviously it can be done. Visiting scientists, visiting students. You've got a grad student coming in for the summer. You know, do you want to go through the whole onboarding process, or do you want to use their home institution identity? If you do that, what do you need to know about their home institution's identity? Is there enough information in there to make reasonable decisions? Are the standardized eduperson fields, are they good enough? Hint, probably not. You may want some more stuff. Yeah, federal employees. So it happens, you know, some of the more scientific oriented agencies, USGS, NIH, okay, there are a lot of requirements around handling that. That's very specialized. General public. Okay, so Rob's talking about, and Doug also talked about having a measure of accountability. How many people are using my data? Who are they? Are they faculty members somewhere? Is it the general public? who's interested in this kind of thing. And then mixed in with that is the topic of how you handle anonymous users. Okay, so anonymous might be, I don't know who they are, but I know how many of them there are, and I know I can identify specific unique users. All of these special cases are what makes identity management difficult, and it's why in every engagement that we've had, that is one of the big topics that comes up. So we created, because we felt like the Ron Swanson help desk, we started creating inside the Identity Management Cookbook, and Josh started the work, and then we've kept developing it, driven by the kinds of questions that we're getting from you at the major facilities. Nice, quick introduction guide that will help you get up to speed immediately when you suddenly get thrown into a new topic. You might be the world's greatest expert in sonar buoys, and now your boss walks in and says, okay, but it needs a login system. Yeah, all right, so it happens. Enough information in there to get you started. Okay, that's good. But also some nice, quick, easy cut and paste for the people that are coming to you with those questions. One section in there that's really in development, going to be expanded a good bit in the next edition, is some examples of how to use some identity management tools. How do you integrate CI logon that solves so many problems? It's wonderful. How do you integrate CI logon if you're developing a web application? So there's some examples in there. I would be delighted if you would take a look at it, see how that reflects your experience. What kinds of questions do you have that have not been addressed? Okay, so I've written down a few things the last couple of days of topics that have come up. It's like, ooh, we need to put that in there. Need your feedback on that because this thing is going to be continuously revised. Easiest way to get it manually is just go to the Compass webpage, click through for partner projects and get it, or there's a URL when the slides are shared. So now I think I'm going to let Josh mediate the questions.
Okay, so thanks to all three of our presenters for the overview of the work that they've been doing over the last couple of years in identity management. We have 12 minutes for questions, so I'll open it up. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand.
Hi, thank you. So I'm thinking about your example that you referred to, the classic one of, identity management, you've got, maybe managed to federate all of your users logging in, and then the first project comes along that wants to add a user. And the question is about self-service. And is there been anything in the work examples or special cases? There are services out there, and I'm thinking of Grouper and Globus Groups, where you can basically grant roles potentially to a PI or their delegate to add and remove people to groups, and then maybe tie that to a policy to say how long that person stays in the group, et cetera. Self-service for project personnel management so that you don't have to do a lot of the add this user, remove this user.
Who wants to take that?
That's coming. That's exactly where we want to get to. We want to be able to say, hey, you PIs, you're the ones that determine, because today it's a manual process, right? Somebody comes to us and says, okay, somebody wants access to your data set. We contact them, they contact back and say yeah or no or whatever. And that's manual. And we want to get out of that business, and we want the PIs to sort of do their work and say, and make it actually easier for them, because then they just get a request saying such and such wants access. Do you want to give it to them? Click on the link and bam, it's all done, right? And maybe, like you suggested, maybe there's a period of time they want to give it to them too as well, and that can be added. But you know, that's where we want to get, is make this all automated and get fewer people into the realm of having to, you know, do work, right? It's just one person and it's done. So yeah, that's where we want to get to.
On the Iris side, it was actually integrated into our Lucid project. So the situation you describe is actually something that, much like in Doug's situation, it's been a manual process where, you know, there was a lot of email exchange before there was a connection between a particular researcher and the PI or PIs who own a particular experiment. So worked in with this authentication system, provided that the user managed to tie their account, their existing legacy account at Iris, to the new login system that we have. If they identified it as a PI, they could actually immediately grant access to other identified users by their email address. So, and then on the reverse is someone can go and look at restricted data sets and actually make a request, a petition to a PI directly from that interface. And we act as our system acts as an intermediary for that. So you're highlighting an excellent example of the benefits that we could see by going down this road of authentication as we start to open the doors of putting more self-serve capabilities in the user's hands.
And if you can use CI logon to co-manage, you have templated self-service account creation. You can have approvers. The chain of trust flows through the approver, assuming you trust your approvers. It's the chain of trust all the way back to the nurse signing the birth certificate. Yeah.
Doug and Rob, do you want to mention the tools that you're looking at to do that?
Yeah, the tools, actually that was the one thing, or not the one thing, but that was the one thing when I did look at CI Logon, and co-manage that was the one thing that was there and ready for us. Unfortunately, with the vendor we chose, that's not something, because that's kind of not something you see in commercial environments maybe as much. So they don't have that, and we'll probably have to develop that separately. So yeah, I mean, you get some, you lose some, so that's the way it is.
Yeah, and some of those tools are in the cookbook, but I don't think currently there's no worked examples of that sort of workflow, although I think Erik has written it down as a future recipe.
Yeah, we'll put it in the cookbook. Right now it's CI Logon 2 documentation. The hard part's hooking everything up, and then once you've done that, you get a lot of stuff.
And we have 2 questions online. Kelly, if you'd like to unmute and ask those questions.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, first from Warren. How much overlap is there between the IDM cookbook and the AARC framework?
There is a cookbook entry for the framework. The cookbook is not prescriptive. It is descriptive. You can look for framework topics in there, but it's definitely not a checklist. Sorry, I'm looking at the screen trying to look.
Yeah, we've tried to, where AARC is relevant to the different tools and products and protocols we're mentioning, we've tried to describe where it fits into that architecture. And there's an overview of the architecture also.
Great. And our second question.
Yeah, this one's from John Haverlack. Can you contrast the challenges with Web 3.0 or decentralized IDM related to providing IDM on platforms with intermittent internet access?
Thanks, John. I knew you would ask something like that.
Yeah. Okay, so if you don't know John Haverlack, possibly oceanography applications, his stuff tends to be out at sea for a very long time. Oh boy. So self-sovereign ID, kind of a scary concept in some ways, because this is where you start relying on blockchain to hold attestations of identifiers that you didn't assign, and then other attestations from people saying, oh yeah, that really is actually the truth. And then the burden gets put on you to make a decision whether that's really an authenticated user. In offline cases, it would come down to an offline blockchain. Fortunately, John, I think you know who's getting on the boat, right? So you can cache it? Maybe?
Do we have John able to respond? I think that's the case. They usually have a list of the scientists going on cruises, and they can
Well, but the different ports, though, people can get off and on, right? So a scientist can get on New Orleans, come off at Savannah.
Right. In terms of specific vessels, I don't know that that's uniform across the fleet. Ryan, do you have an idea? Okay.
Also, you've got like at least 256K bed or more practically anywhere unless you're in a storm with a ship rolled half over, and then you've got other problems.
John has been a regular and consistent contributor to the identity management group, and we've loved working with him and appreciated his input to the cookbook also. We have more questions.
I do see that John is typing a response online, so we'll see if that comes through in time. In the meantime, if we have any other questions, yeah, we do.
For the command line portion of the COG, I'm not quite sure who talked about it first, but have you guys looked into removing the password in general and using like SSH keys? Since I know that's what GitHub did recently within past years, so that's always an option. Have you guys looked into that?
I'm sorry, looking at,
Personalized access tokens?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like using SSH keys rather than password.
no, we have not done that. But we are in the machine-to-machine interface. It's basically kind of the same thing, almost, very similar. People will be given keys that they know about, and they can use that to then access. They will apply for those, and we're going to, because of the restriction we had about using them, we're going to have to say like 1 key per user. You won't get multiples, but we think that'll suffice for our community. But yeah, we didn't go down the SSH route. Yeah.
Well, and the interesting point about personalized access tokens is that it allows an authenticated user to generate a token that has specific permissions. And so you can actually have different customized tokens with different kinds of use cases. And those, that helps to increase the safety and security of using something broadly. So it's a good model. And I think that's something we may look at as we get into our new architecture. Because like I say, we're kind of held back by our 10-year-old form of data access right now. So we can't immediately go into an OAuth 2 model of interaction, though UNAVCO is actually doing that right now. So we're going to be working together on something that's more on the OAuth way of working, and those personalized access tokens gives a lot of power and capability to users to craft their accesses.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks, Doug, Rob, and Eric.